This tape is from the Shabbos Farbrengen of Vayetze, Yud Aleph Kislev Tavshin Men Gimel.
Well, of the day of Petira was on the very same day. And this is what the Gemara refers to, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is memalesh neseim shel tzadikim, the Rebbe gives the lives of tzadikim miyoim el yoim, exactly from the day that they were born. The date of birth and the date of Petira falls out to be on the same day. And here the Rebbe added in that though we do not find this by all tzaddikim, by many tzaddikim we find that the date of birth is different from the day of Petira. So the Rebbe added on, bigolui, in other words, we don't see it. However, the pnimi yisonyonim, the inyan in its contents, which has to be accomplished by this ruchniisdika level of one being niftar on the very same day that he was born, these other tzaddikim also have. The only thing, we don't see it. In reality, in Begashmis, we don't see it. Begashmis, we see that the Yom HaYiledes, the day of birth, and the day of Petira happens to be a different one from another. However, this does not mean that they are lacking this spiritual advantage which the other tzaddikim do have. In general, in Torah, the Rebbe went on, we find in Yonim Shazman Grama, meaning that if it's a question, what type of inyan should one learn in Torah today? So normally, all in Yonim and Torah are equal, on one hand. On the other hand, for instance, if it's a Zman of Yontef, for example, we know that the dinim of Yontef have a preference b'negei other in Yonim of Torah. In other words, we should prefer learning the dinim that have a shaykhs to a given Yontef if we are in the middle of that given Yontef, because this is Hazman Grama, this has a shaykhs to the time of right now. Memela. This is b'negei Torah in general. And if we're talking about Torah, Rebbe says, all of Torah is really one. Sai Torah shebiksav, and Sai Torah shebal peh. We cannot divide between the two. There are in Yonim and Torah shebiksav that are incomplete unless we come on to Torah shebal peh. And here the Rebbe brought a famous example, b'negei tefillin. How do we know that we have to put on tefillin on our left hand? Because the pasuk uses the expression al yotcha. Normally yotcha has to be spelled yud daled langechof. How is Yotcha spelled here? Yud Dalet Chof Hey. It's a strange way of spelling Yotcha. So Chazal Darshan, it does, besides meaning that the tefillin have to be put on Yotcha, it also means that the tefillin have to be put on the Yad Keha, the weak hand. And which is the weaker hand of the two? It is the left one. So on one hand, it's something which says Beferish in the Torah. The Torah tells us Yotcha, and the Torah tells us Yotcha in such a way that it has to mean the left hand. However, do we know that it means left hand? If one should learn Torah Shebiksav only, one would learn Chumash only, he wouldn't know this. It is only through the interpretation of Chazal, through Torah Shebal Peh, that Torah Shebal Peh teaches us various klalim and diktuk. So we know how the word Yotcha has to be spelled. And here that we see that Yotcha is spelled different, so Mamela, this alerts us that the Chacham had a ground to interpret the pasuk that not only does it mean tefillin has to be put on a hand in general, but the Torah directs us on which of the two hands do we have to put on tefillin. So when we're talking about Torah, really all halakim and Torah are really one. It is one Torah, but Torah is composed of several halakim. And as we start today, the nusach tefillah is that we start today right away. The first thing we say right after birchas HaTorah is we say birchas koyanim. After saying these psukim, we say a quotation from Mishnah, Elu Dvarim Shein Lahem Shia, which is a Mishnah in Pei. After that, after davening from front, we come to Eizehu Mekoyim. And as Sfarim tell us, Shulchan Aruch tells us, this is where a Yid has a chance to learn Torah. Right away after saying brachas, we immediately learn Torah. We learn Torah Sheba Ksav, the written Torah. We learn it by saying the psukim of Yivrechecha. We learn the oral Torah, Torah Shebal Peh, by saying right after the Mishnah of Elu Dvarim Shein Lahem Shia, which is Mishnah in Masechta Peyah, as well as the Perek of Eizehu Mekoyim. Why was it that the Perek Eizehu Mekoyim was selected as opposed to any other Perek in Mishnah? Mishnah is composed of many, many prakim. Why is it that the Mesadri Atfila, the Chazal have chosen Dafke this Perek. As the Rebbe went on, it's something very interesting in this Perek. As the Perek stands, from Eizehu Mekoimon till the end, there is no Machloikes Hatanoim in this Perek. All over in other Prokim of Mishnayos, we find within the Perek differences of opinion of the Tanoim, Benegeh the Inyanim which are discussed in this Perek. And this Perek here of Eizehu Mekoimon, there are no Machloikes. However, the Rebbe added on, it does not mean that all the dinim, all the halachas that are said in the Perek Eizehu Mekoimon are agreed by all. This is not so. Just to cite one example, we say that ha-Pesach ein nechal ela at chatzos, that Pesach, the Korban Pesach, could be eaten until midnight. This is not agreeable by everyone. Some Tanoim claim that Korban Pesach could be eaten until Alois HaShachar. So right away we have a machlokes in an inyan which is discussed in Eizehu Mekoimon. However, the machlokes is not mentioned in the Perek. Gemara brings it later, it's brought in the Gemara in the Masechta. However, as these Mishnahs come as a Perek, the Perek of Eizehu Mekoimon, this does not contain any machlokes within it. What does this Perek remind us of? Rebbe says this is a reminder of the whole idea of Torah Achsidus. Because when we're talking Torah Achsidus as opposed to Nigla de Torah, in Nigla de Torah we know we have various machlokes of Tanoim and Ameroim and so forth. However, in Torah Achsidus there's the expression which is used in the Eitz Chaim, Leis Tamon, there does not exist there, Loi Kushav, Loi Machlokes. There's no union of machlokes in Pnimiyus HaTorah. So here we have a Perek of Torah Shebal Peh, a Perek of Eizehu Mekoimon. However, this Perek of Eizehu Mekoimon reminds us of the whole idea of Pnimiyus HaTorah. So on one hand, the Rebbe goes on, this is the Chelek HaTfilah which we recite daily, every day, regardless what that day is. A Yid starts the day with saying brachas. After brachas, he goes on, he says the same psukim of Yivrechecha every single day, says the same Mishnah Elu Dvarim, and says the same Mishnah of Eizehu Mekoimon. However, on one hand, it seems that it's the same. The truth is, it is not so. Why? Being that every day has its inyan with what every day excels in, Kol Yoima V'Yoima Ovid Avidite, every day is something special. B'Negei Yom Kippur we find, Yom Kippur had required various additional korbanos. So the Gemara tells us that being that on Yom Kippur we brought the additional korbanos, however, together with it, we also brought the Korban Tamid. Korban Tamid is a korban which was brought every single day of the year in the Beis HaMikdash, regardless whether it was Shabbos, whether it was Yontif, whether it was Yom Kippur. Every day of the year the Korban Tamid was brought. The Gemara uses the expression that ahane, the fact that it is Yom Kippur, also helps for the Korban Tamid. Though the Korban Tamid is something which is brought daily, every weekday, and every Shabbos and every Yom, still the Korban Tamid which is brought on Yom Kippur is a different Korban Tamid. Spiritually, the halachas were naturally the same, but it's an andere Korban Tamid. The same thing the Gemara says, B'Negeiah, the korbanos which were brought on Shabbos and Yontif, the Gemara says, ahana, the fact that it is Shabbos and Yontif also helps, not only for the Musafim, for the korban which is the Musaf, which was brought the additional korban because it's Shabbos and Yontif, it also helps for the Korban Tamid which is brought daily. Being that this Tamid is brought on a Shabbos, it's already a different type of a Korban Tamid. Same thing the Rebbe says. B'Negeiah, today's date, which on one hand it's a Shabbos and without anything outstanding within it. However, being that this is the Shabbos that follows, the days of Tesh Kislev and Yud Kislev, it also helps that all the heroes which we're going to take out are completely different heroes. It's a completely different Shabbos. It's a Shabbos which was ahane, as the Gemara uses the expression. It helps for the Shabbos and the good decisions which we are going to make on this Shabbos, that they should all be in a format which is suitable to Yud Kislev. What is the whole idea of Yud Kislev? It's the day of the liberation of the Mittel Rebbe. And the Rebbe says if we were to allow ourselves to go ahead and differentiate between the various Rabbeim, the Mittel Rebbe is referred to by Chassidim as Sfiras Habina. Sfiras begin from Chachma on, the Alter Rebbe is Sfiras HaChachma, the Mittel Rebbe is Sfiras Habina. V'eshalcha berachava. In other words, by the Mittel Rebbe we find something which was not found previously, and we do not find it by later Rebbeim, a tremendous breitkeit in the whole idea of Torah Chassidus. He elaborated a lot in Chassidus, say when he said it, as well as when he wrote it, and this is something which the Mittel Rebbe is noteworthy for the fact that he really gave us a tremendous amount of Chassidus. So, amongst all the good hachlotes, all the good decisions which are appropriate to make on this day, on the day of Yud Kislev, the Rebbe said it's extremely appropriate also to have one of the decisions, one that should call and a reminder to all of us to really extend ourselves as far as simply the learning of Chassidus goes. That we should really make more shiurim Chassidus, learn more Chassidus, because this is the whole idea of the Mittel Rebbe. This was his whole inyan, the idea of es halcha berchava, a breitkeit in limud Chassidus. Particularly, this is a hero which has a shaykhus to Yud Kislev in general. Being that Yud Kislev this year comes out on a Friday, and here the Rebbe said, though we know that Shabbos has a shaykhus to all the days of the week that passed, as explained in Hasidus, that Shabbos elevates the entire week, however, Friday has a special shaykhus to Shabbos. And just to see how Friday has a special shaykhus to Shabbos, here the Rebbe brought an example that there is a minig Chabad, and he says the minig is followed by other communities as well, that when one has Yortzeit on Friday, so he has to say Kaddish on Friday naturally. However, he says one more Kaddish, and that is the Kaddish of Friday night's davening. After Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos there is a Kaddish, that comes after L'Chadaydi, after Mizmor Shir. That Kaddish, the one that has Yortzeit on Friday, also has to say that Kaddish. Though that Kaddish is recited when? In Shabbos. So here we see how the Friday and Shabbos go very closely together. This week's Sedra is the Sedra of Vayetze. So though this year the Hira is extremely outstanding because of the Kviyos of Yud Kislev being so close to Shabbos, Pashas Vayetze, this does not mean, the Rebbe says, that this Hira, this lesson does not pertain to other years as well, being that it's part of Torah. However, this year it's extremely outstanding. What is the whole idea of the Sedra of Vayetze? So Hasidus explains, and Taka the Mittel Rebbe explains in his Sfarim, that just Pasuk uses the expression Vayetze Yankov Mebeir Shava Vayelach Haran, that this whole idea of Yankov's leaving Beersheva and going to Haran is compared to the Neshama leaving Shamayim, the Neshama leaving the Olam Ha'elyon and going to Haran. Haran stems from the word anger. Charoin af shaloylam. The Neshama going to such a place which creates anger to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Where is this? Olam Hazeh. So this is actually what the whole Sedra is talking about. The Sedra is discussing the whole idea of Yeridas HaNeshama, of the Neshama coming down into this world. And just like by Yankov, the goal of his trip was that ultimately he will return to his father. As Yankov himself says, the Rebishter will be with me. Yushmarani b'derech hazeh. And then he goes on, V'shafti b'shalom el beis avi. He will return, b'shalom, he will return peacefully and complete to his father's house. The same idea is in Ruchnius. The Neshama comes down into this world. The Neshama comes down into Haran with the ultimate goal of returning complete and peaceful el beis avi to the Rabbeinu Shalom. After living through all the years on this world, the Neshama should return to its master in a complete position. However, this is what we read about the beginning of the Sedra. It comes further in the Sedra, in the part of the Sedra that Taka has a shaykhus to Yud Kislev and to the Shabbos following Yud Kislev. Here we read how Yankov is leaving Chutz La'aretz. He's leaving his involvement with Lavan, and where is he going to? He's going to Eretz Yisrael. And just like we find here, when Yankov originally arrived to Lavan, Yankov came to Lavan, we know as Chazal tell us, he was extremely poor. Yankov came penniless to Lavan. However, when Yankov is leaving the Golus and he's returning to Eretz Yisrael, Yankov is leaving here blessed with a family, with children, with slaves, and with wealth. The pasuk describes us exactly that how Yankov was extremely blessed with an extraordinary amount of wealth, and to such an extent that we read that when Yankov was about to leave Chutz La'aretz and enter into Eretz Yisrael. In other words, when Yankov's Golus finished, Vayifku by Malachei Elokim. Whom did Yankov meet? Yankov met Malachim. What does Malachim mean? Shalichim. Who were they sent from? The Rebishter. And this is something not what Yankov planned for it, but Yankov lived up to such a standard that he was worthwhile of meeting Malachei Elokim. And as the pasuk goes ahead, Vayomer Yaakov Kasharom, the last pasuk of the Sedra, Machne Elokim ze, Vayikro Shem HaMokem Ahu, and he referred to this place, Machanoim. So Rashi tells us, Shtei Machanois, there were two groups of Malachim there. Shal Chutz La'aretz, Shabo Imoy Atkan, the Malachim of Chutz La'aretz that came with him until here. Vishal Eretz Yisrael, Shabo L'Kosei. The Rebbe says, look what happened. Malachei Eretz Yisrael are never allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. Here something extraordinary happened, something special. That the Malachim of Eretz Yisrael went out of the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, entered Chutz La'aretz to greet Yaakov. So this is the lesson that we are supposed to take from here as well. A Yid is involved in Golus, just like Yaakov was in Golus. Everything that happened with the Ovis, Maisa Ovis similar Banim, so it has a shaykhs to each and every Yid. Especially the Rebbe says when we're talking about a child. Child goes out into the street, finds himself, who is he surrounded with? He's surrounded with Goyim. So he automatically right away sees that he's in Golus. Same applies to adults as well. And when we realize that we are in Golus, our attitude is supposed to be similar to the attitude of Yankov. And when we succeed overcoming the Golus, just like Yaakov did, then the Rebishter benches us that we are in the same position like Yaakov, that we live up to Vayifku by Malachei Elokim, that we are rewarded by the Rebishter, that the Rebishter sends Malachim to each and every Yid. And even these Malachim that normally would not leave Eretz Yisrael, because of the Yid's attitude in Golus, the Rebishter sees how a Yid behaved himself in Golus. The Rebishter appreciates it so that he takes the Malachim that normally belong in Eretz Yisrael and sends them outside of the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, that they should go ahead and greet this Yid that is coming back from Golus. Yaakov he remained a proud Jew. He did not give himself under any outside influences, but he remained proud and firm to what the request of Hashem was. It has a shaykhs to every Yid in general. Of this week's Sedra. The Sedra of this week requires how we are to act in Golus, throughout Golus. I don't recall the Rebbe stressing the shaykhs to Yid Kislev. Later in the Farbrengen, as in many Farbrengens, the Rebbe referred to these publications which are Ha'aras HaTmimim, various publications which are published throughout the yeshivas, which discuss Inyonim and Chasidus, Inyonim in the Rebbe Siches, and so forth. In one of these Ha'aras HaTmimim, there was an Igeras HaKodesh from the Alter Rebbe discussed recently. And that is a famous Igeras HaKodesh. It's Igeras HaKodesh, I think it is Chav Daled, where the Alter Rebbe prohibits very strongly talking during davening. And there the Alter Rebbe uses the expression Shloi lasuach sicha b'teila, not to talk anything, misheyaschel hashliach tzibur lehispalel hatvila, from when the Shatz begins davening, ad gmar kaddish bascha, until after the last and final kaddish. And this applies to Shachris, Arvis, and Mincha, to all three tefillas, Shachris, Ma'ariv, and Mincha. And here the Alter Rebbe adds on another word, v'chulhu, etc. So in the back of the Tanya, there are ha'orais from the Rebbe's Ulgesundsein, which the Rebbe wrote when the Tanya was published the first time here in the United States. And there the Rebbe corrected that the sequence here is a little bit strange. We do not daven Shachris, Arvis, and Mincha. It should be Shachris, Mincha, and Arvis. So the Rebbe corrected it that this is how it should be. And the ground of the Rebbe's correction, as he writes Taki here in the Ha'ores, and the Rebbe explained it today, Rebbe says that the children of the Alter Rebbe write in their Hakdamah to the Tanya that when all the Geras HaKodesh, when all the letters of the Alter Rebbe were accumulated, they did not have them in original. It was copies. And therefore it was very possible that various errors should come into the letters. Based on this assumption, the Rebbe says, it is very possible to say that the Alter Rebbe here also write it in the proper way, Shachris, Mincha, and Arvis, but somehow when somebody rewrote the letter, that is how he copied it, and it was by error, in other words. Rebbe also referred today that the Tzemach Tzedek in Derech Mitzvah Secha refers to another one of the Alter Rebbe's letters in Igeres HaKodesh, the famous one, Igeres Chof, which is also a very famous Igeres HaKodesh, Iyu v'chayeyu chad, and there the Tzemach Tzedek writes that he has the original of this Igeres HaKodesh, and also not complete. So from this we also see that to the rest of the Igeres Kodesh, the rest of the letters of the Alter Rebbe, the originals were not around when the Tanya was printed. So based on this, it was very possible that when somebody rewrote the letters until it finally came to print, he may have made a small error and did not write it in the proper sequence. The question also arises, what is the V'chulhu? There are 3 tefillas. What else does he mean? So in the Ha'oras HaTmimim, somebody suggested perhaps the Alter Rebbe is referring to Musaf and to Ne'ilah, which are 2 other tefillas, which the Alter Rebbe does not mention them specifically. However, he may be referring to these tefillas. The Rebbe says it's very hard to say so. Why? Usually, the word v'chulhu, if we want to save many words, we put in v'chulu, etc. How many words is the Alter Rebbe saving here? 2 words. Musaf and Ne'ilah. He's replacing the 2 words with 1 word, v'chulu. So it's schwer to say, it's hard to say that the Alter Rebbe is saving 1 word and uses a v'chulu to save 1 word. But, how do we know by Musaf and Ne'ilah that we're not allowed to talk? This, the Rebbe says, is very simple. Because the Alter Rebbe says that we are not allowed to talk ad Kaddish Basra until after the last and final Kaddish of each of these tefillas. When we daven Shachas, there's no final Kaddish. When Musaf follows Shachas, there's no final Kaddish after Shachas. So as long as we didn't come to the final Kaddish after Musaf, we're still not allowed to talk. The same applies b'negei Ne'ilah. Ne'ilah comes behemshich to Mincha on Yom Kippur. There is no Kaddish Basra, there is no final Kaddish after Mincha, because Mincha is followed with Ne'ilah. So automatically we know that it's before the Gemara Kaddish Basra, and therefore we cannot talk yet. However, the Rebbe feels that the V'chulhu has a different meaning. We know there is V'goymer and there is V'chulhu. V'goymer usually applies to an end of a pasuk. When a pasuk is quoted partially, and we don't want to quote the rest of the pasuk, usually we use the expression V'goymer. And this is based on a halacha, Kol psuke deloi paske Moshe anan loi paskinon, which means any pasuk which Moshe did not. In other words, we're supposed to repeat a pasuk in its original way. And if Moshe did not make it, we're supposed to say him as psukim only how Moshe made them as psukim. And if we repeat a half a pasuk, this is not the way Moshe made it as a pasuk. So that is why when we do that, we usually conclude the goymer. In other words, we refer to the rest of the pasuk. This is by a pasuk in an inyan, whereby we use the expression v'chulhu, etc. It could mean 2 things. It could mean v'chulhu, like in this particular case, it should come to remind for some additional tefillas. This is not applicable here. Why? Because Alter Rebbe already mentioned the 3 major tefillas, Shachas, Mincha, and Ma'ariv, and as we just said, Musaf and Ne'ilah are included in this case. V'chulhu here means that there can be an entirely different explanation for this whole inyan. The Alter Rebbe explains us here in Igeres HaKodesh 1 way why we're not allowed to talk during davening. And he says that it's strictly prohibited, l'siach, sicha betela, from beginning of davening till the very end. However, he concludes, v'cholu. If you want, I'm telling you that there are other explanations also pertaining to probation of talking during davening. However, the Alter Rebbe himself is not getting involved here in it. He's not getting involved in detail to refer to any other type of explanation. In other words, what he's out to say with the v'chulu is that this inyan could be elaborated and more could be spoken about it. However, he's not doing it here. The Rebbe also referred to talking on this inyan, he also referred to a Vayetze Chaim. That the Chaim tells us, it says, Shachris, we say Krishma in Shachris. In Ma'ariv, there's also a Krishma. Where is the inyan ruchni of Krishma benegei tfilas mincha? So, Vayetze Chaim, he says that the Krishma of Shachris applies to mincha as well. However, here the Rebbe added on, this does not mean that we're not allowed to talk between Shachris and mincha. On the contrary, say that we're not allowed to talk between Shachris and Mincha. That's the major time of the day. That's when a man goes out to cover his entire day of work. However, the tefillah itself, from the very beginning of the tefillah till the very end of each tefillah, in other words, and from Mincha, it's from Ashrei of Mincha, not from Shachris, but from the Ashrei of Mincha till the very final Kaddish of Mincha, we're again not allowed to talk. Now, while talking about this inyan, Rebbe got to talk of the importance how every inyan in Torah has to be accurate. And here we have an inyan that there's a letter from the Alter Rebbe, and the question is, we are under the opinion that the way it's printed, had to be corrected. And this, the Rebbe says, is a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, that one is not allowed to possess in his house a sefer she'einem mugeh, a sefer that has errors in it. We're not allowed to have such a sefer. Rebbe referred that there was a chassid by the name of Reb David Hirschel. This Reb David Hirschel was a Rav in Chernigiv. He may have been known as Radatz. Radatz Chain was his last name. And while mentioning him, the Rebbe says that when he was in his early childhood, he wondered why Chassidim always referred to this Reb David Hirschel as Reb David Hirschel. I mean, we're talking about a Rav who's such a great Goen, and a Rav of Ishtat, and a tremendous Talmud Chacham, and here all of town talks about him without any title of Rav. And not only that, not calling him Rav, but not only do we refer to him as Reb David Hirsch, but Reb David Hirschel. I mean, he's so buddy with us. We're talking about a tremendous Talmud Chacham, a tremendous outstanding Goen. Rebbe said, Yogaita Matzasa. He was looking for an interpretation, an explanation for it, and he found. Gemara tells us, Benegei David HaMelech, that when somebody referred to Yoav ben Tzruya, who was the Sar HaTzova, in the presence of David, and referred to him with a title, Gemara tells us that it's considered a merida b'malchus. It's considered not honoring David properly. Why? Because in the presence of a king, no other title exists. Same the Rebbe says when we're talking about a Chassidish Rav, wherever he is, he's always in the presence of the Rebbe. He always has his Rebbe with him. And Memele, there is no need, when we're talking about a Rav like Reb David Hirschel, to give him any additional titles and refer to him as Harav Reb David Hirsch or something like it, because he is a chassid who was solely dedicated to his Rebbe. And Memele, wherever he was, he had the Rebbe with him. So just to refer to him by the name of Reb David Hirschel was sufficient. The Rebbe mentioned this derech agav, as a Maimer HaMuzga. What the Rebbe wanted to say was that to this Reb David Hirschel, somebody once came, and it was after the first print of the Likutei Torah. The first print of the Likutei Torah had many errors. So somebody came to Reb David Hirsch, and he told them that he reviewed the Likutei Torah, and in the next edition of the Likutei Torah, all the errors would be omitted. And the person was explaining, it'll be a pleasure to learn Likutei Torah now. Now, like this, there are many printing mistakes, and that used to cause interference. And now, when one will be able to learn Likutei Torah, he'll be able to learn Likutei Torah properly, smoothly. So Reb David Hirschel told him he's wrong. Why? Chassidim knew that the Likutei Torah had errors. It was something which was known, that there were a lot of printing mistakes in the Likutei Torah. So when they were learning Likutei Torah, they were alert to watch for the errors. So they were learning with a certain amount of an alertness. They had something to watch for. Now when a person's going to sit down by the Likutei Torah and he'll know that the Likutei Torah is perfect, there are no errors there are no mistakes there, so it's a chaplan and he'll learn the Likutei Torah and afterwards he'll be able to fall asleep. He's not going to be able to, there's not going to be anything special, attractive, nothing special to attract him during his learning of Likutei Torah. So therefore he felt that it was better to leave the Likutei Torah with all the mistakes, and then when one learns Likutei Torah he'll be more alert than when one learns it now that the Likutei Torah was corrected from all its printing mistakes. Rebbe says this is how he felt about it. However, l'maisa and lahalacha, it's a pleasure when we can take a sefer in our hand which definitely does not have any errors, and memela, and especially that it's tied in with a halacha. That halacha requires that one shouldn't possess in his house a sefer she'einin mugeh. So memela the Rebbe expressed his feeling that best would be, that our best hope should be that in benegei all inyanim in Torah, we should be able to learn them properly and correctly without any errors, in the contents of printing errors in the contents of the inyanim which we are learning. As usual in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also referred to Ha'oras Hanzoach from his father and Arashi in this week's Sedre. Briefly, the Ha'oras Hanzoach refers to an incident of 3 Tanoim which praised Rashbi. Shimon ben Yochai. 3 different Tanoim praised him. So the introduction of the Zohar is that Reb Shimon ben Yochai was going lekarta, was going to a city. And Rab Abba praised him with a pasuk, Vashem Omar al Avram. Reb Chia praised him with a pasuk which is taken from Yaakov Avinu. And Rabbi Yossi praised them with a pasuk which has a shaykhs to Leah, to Yehuda, who was the son of Leah. Firstly, the Rebbe quoted from the Oyer HaChama. Oyer HaChama is a Kabbalah sefer, a pirush on Zoya, and the Rebbe says usually it's a very authentic pirush, and he's quoted in Chassidus very, very often. The Oyer HaChama says that why was Rashbi traveling here? Where did he go? So the Oyer HaChama says he was going for an inyan shel parnasa. That's what he was going for. Rebbe says it's strange to say so. Why? Because we know there's a famous Gemara in Brachas, famous machlokes between Rab Shimon ben Yochai and Rabbi Shmuel. Rab Shimon ben Yochai expressed himself, Klum adam chayresh adam zareya, if a person is going to be involved in his field work, Torah matahei alei, what will be with Torah? Rabbi Shmuel felt different. Rabbi Shmuel felt that a person should be involved in an occupation, and then, together with this, he should have the Kviyas Situm l'Torah. Rashbi's attitude was that a person has to constantly be learning Torah. So if Rashbi, Rab Shimon ben Yochai, demanded this from others, then naturally he himself definitely lived up to this. So it's hard to say that Rab Shimon ben Yochai was traveling for an inyan of parnasa. Where did Rab Shimon ben Yochai have parnasa from? Rabbi says the Medrash tells us that his father, Rabbi Yochai, was extremely wealthy, and he was a Makor of Lamalchus. He had very big connections, and he supported Rashbi. He supported his son Rab Shimon. So in this particular pirush of the Oyer HaChama, the Rebbe says it's very hard to learn how the Oyer HaChama wants to learn Pshat in the Zohar. What's the Pshat? Rab Shimon went lekarta. Why did he go to a city? So here the Rebbe referred this to the other Maimer Razal. Mara tells us that when Rab Shimon ben Yochai and his son Rabbi Lezer came out of the cave, wherever Rabbi Lezer did damage, Rashbi, his son, healed the damage. So what? Rashbi the father, Rabbi Lezer, the son, was not, after being that many years in the cave, he was not able to be soivel, he wasn't able to digest the whole inyan of Elam Hazeh. So that is why Rabbi Lezer Mochi. However, his father, Rab Shimon Mosi, he was the one that healed everything. Wherever Rabbi Eliezer may have caused the damage, the father Rashbi healed it. So what do we see from this? That Rab Shimon ben Yochai had his inyanim. He had his inyanim of tikkunim, of being mesaken things. Naturally not going for parnasa, but he was mesaken inyanim eruchnius. So if we're talking here about a Zohar which tells us that Rab Shimon ben Yochai went traveling to a city, naturally what did he go traveling for? He went for his tikkunim, for his inyanim ruchniim, which Rab Shimon had to accomplish in his days. And the Rebbe also got involved in all these 3 inyanim Rab Abba quoting from a pasuk that has a shaykhus to Avram, and the Rebbe explained the difference between Avram and Avraham. Avram is we're talking about Avram and a higher madrege. Avram, as opposed to when he has the hay, he has a shaykhus to Hamoin Goyim Nisaticha. Av Hamoin Goyim Nisaticha. The Rebbe gave him already as a shaykhus, as a father to the world. However, the way he's standing in the level of Avram, he's standing Avram, he's Ogetrogen, as the expression goes in Yiddish, he's completely higher from all the Inyanim that have a shaykhus to the world. Again, Yaakov, each and every Yid has a shaykhus to Yaakov. As the Gemara tells us, Avram had descendants Yishmael. Yitzchak had descendants Esav and Esav's children. However, by Yaakov, we find Mitase Shleima, all the children of Yaakov were perfect. It was a complete picture by Yaakov that everyone remained in Yiddishkeit, everyone remained having a shaykhus to the Rebishter. As well as the Inyan of Yehuda and Leah being the mother of Yehuda, which this also has a shaykhus, as he explains it here in the commentary of the Rebbe's father, how this also has a shaykhus to everyone. Hapam Oides Hashem, that's why she called him Yehuda, because this was a feeling of Oides Hashem, the idea of Oides Hashem as a shaykhus to everyone. But again, the Rashi in this week's Sedre, Rebbe says, being that it were the days of Tes and Yud Kislev, he'll learn an Inyan which also has a shaykhus to the Mittel Rebbe. And that is, we find in this week's Sedre, when Yaakov is leaving Lavan, and they're dividing the sheep, which sheep should belong to Yaakov, and what remains with Lavan, the pasuk uses the expression that all these sheep, Kapitel Lamed Aleph, pasuk Yud, Akudim, Nekudim, Uvrudim, which this is the description for the sheep which they were dotted, they had something outstanding within them. Now it's a siman on the outside, whether it was Akudim, Nekudim, or Berudim. As Rashi explains exactly what each of these three differences apply to, and we will see in a minute. The Mittel Rebbe, in his Chassidus, in Parashas Noach, the Rebbe says, Reishis or Noach, refers to the inyan of Nekudim and Berudim, how this has a shaykhus to a very deep inyan which is discussed in Chassidus, Olam Hatayu and Olam Hatikun, which is something which is a very in-depth inyan in Chassidus. And the Mittel Rebbe there explains that Nekudim is Olam Hatayu, and Berudim is Olam Hatikun. Let us look into the Rashi. Rashi comes to touch up the word Vrudim. Targumoi, Rashi says. What is the Targum of the word Vrudim? Ufzichen. And Rashi is learning with a child, with a 5-year-old. So Rashi times quotes certain expressions from that time French, as Rashi does right here, in order that the child should understand exactly what it means. Chutsha Lavan, Rashi goes ahead, a white strip, makif es gufay saviv, would surround the entire body of the behemoth. V'chabarbure shaloi psucho umefuleshes mezu el zu, and the dots on the behemoth go like open from one into another. This is the description of the Vrudim. Memela, any behemoth amongst the behemoths of Lavan, which lived up to this requirement, which was a Vrudim, belonged to whom? To Yaakov. What does Nekudim mean? As we learned previously, Nekudim is only pintalach. In other words, dots. However, this is a continuation of a surrounding line. So this is actually the shaykhus, al pichsidis. Why Nekudim has a shaykhus to Toyu, and Vrudim has a shaykhus to Tikkun, because things separate, things isolated, that's the inyan of Olam HaToyu, as opposed to Hiskalalus, how when Yonim go tied one with another, this is what has a stronger shaykhus to Olam HaTikkun. That is why Vrudim, as explained in the Mittel Rebbe's Chassidus, has a shaykhus to Tikkun. And Rashi continues, Ve'ein li lahavi eid min amikra. Rashi says there is no other, as we learn in Pashat Pshat and Rashi, nowhere else where the pasuk uses an expression Vrudim. So actually, the whole interpretation, how Rashi teaches Vrudim, is based on the Targum. The Rebbe says there's the concordancia, which is something which, for one to look in the concordancia, the Rebbe said, it doesn't have to be much of a lamdan. And this is a sefer which is old already hundreds of years. One can go over and open and check, do we find the word v'rudim elsewhere in Tanakh, or don't we? If we do this, the Rebbe says, we will see that in Tanakh, in the sefer of Zechariah, he describes a nevuah there, a prophecy, where he uses the expression v'rudim several times. So we see that the word v'rudim is mentioned elsewhere in the Torah. And here Rashi says, Ein li lahavi eid min hamikra. There's nowhere else where I can bring a comparison to compare and look for the taich of the word v'rud. It's an open pasuk, and pasuk in Zechariah Hanavi, where he uses the word v'rud. In order for us to understand this Rashi, the Rebbe refers to pasuk Mem Aleph in Kapitel Lamed. V'hoya b'chol yachem hatzoyin ha-mukasharos, v'som Yaakov v'samaklos la'ene hatzoyin b'rahotim liyachmeina b'maklos. Yaakov wanted to, in order that more of the sheep should fall into the category of having these akudim, nekudim, of rudim, they should belong to Yaakov. So Yaakov was prepared the maklos, the sticks, and as Rashi tells us, what's the whole idea of these sticks? There's a Rashi in Pasuk Lamed Zayin, Machsoif Halovan. What Yaakov did was he peeled the sticks so that there should only remain Gilui Loiven Shel Makal. Only the white should remain on the stick. The stick shouldn't have any other color. And through these sticks, by clapping the behemoths with these sticks, that is how they got the color. And Memela, Yaakov had more akudim, nekudim, of rudim, which should belong to him. In this Rashi there hamukusharos, on Pasuk Mem Aleph, Rashi uses the expression kitargumoy hapchiros. And Rashi over there also says, Ein loy eid b'mikra. Menachem Chibroi, Imachi Teufel, Bakoishchem. Menachem, who was another Pashton, just like Rashi, ties it to a pasuk in Shmuel, Achi Teufel Bakoishchem. Or another pasuk, Vayhi HaKesher Amitz. The Rebbe is out to explain is, Ein loy eid b'mikra does not mean that this word does not exist elsewhere in the Torah. The word, in other words, the same composition of a word could exist. However, it should have the same taich. That does not exist. Memela, just like, that is why the Rebbe is coming on to the Rashi in Pasuk Mem Aleph. Just like over there, Rashi uses the expression Ein lo ye'ed b'mikra. And Rashi there means Ein lo ye'ed b'mikra, that there's no witness for it in the Torah. What's the pshat? There's nowhere else where the pasuk, mukusharos is a word which is used many times in the Torah. Mukusha, and so forth. However, with this meaning, we do not find it elsewhere in the Torah. The same the Rebbe is learning here. When the pasuk uses the expression uvrudim, it does not mean that we do not find this word elsewhere in the Torah. Yes, we do. There's a pasuk in Zechariah. However, vrudim should mean a surrounding white line going around the behemoth. A surrounding white line. This is the only place where it means this. And here the Rebbe always keeps on stressing that in Rashi we always have Yena Shel Torah as well. Besides Rashi always sticking extremely to Pshat, this is the primary union of Rashi, that Ani lo basi lafarish el pshute shel mikra. Besides that, there is always hidden in Rashi the wine of Torah. What do we mean by the wine of Torah? We mean Pnimiyus HaTorah, Rozei Torah, secrets of Torah, in Yonam of Chasidus. What's the Pshat here? Rashi is talking about a chut shel lavan. What is a chut shel lavan? What's the white? A white string. Makif es gufei soviv, surrounding the guf. So here the Rebbe refers to Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day it is known as an achas bashana. It's a very outstanding day, one day in the year. and explained in Hasidus, it is so outstanding. It's outstanding on all levels. It's outstanding on Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. The day in itself is very outstanding. The Avodah is done by a very achazdike person, the Kohen Gadol, who is one and only. There's no other Kohen Gadol his equal. And it is done in a place which is also achas. Where is the Avodah done? The Avodah is done in the Kodesh Kadoshim. There is no place in the world it's equal in Kedusha to the Kodesh HaKadosh. How is the Avodah done? On Yom Kippur, on this very holy day, as we just described, this very, very holy Avodah, this Avodah is done in Big Day Lavan, in white clothes. What does white clothes stand for? So here Hasidus explains that when we're talking about a Gilui of Etzem HaNefesh, something which comes out without anything additional, something in its complete originality, this is the idea of white. Anything which has a color is something additional. When we're talking something, colors, this is what Rashi keeps on stressing here. Gilui loivin shel makil. The makil was peeled. In other words, the color, the additional color on the makil was peeled, and therefore the makil, the stick, was left in its originality. What is the originality of the stick? It's lavan. Here we are talking about a chut shel lavan, that every yid should know that there is an etzem nefesh within him. And this chut shel lavan is not only is it a chut, but it is makif es gufay soviv. This surrounds the entire body of a yid. In other words, every yid has an etzem nefesh within him, and this ties him and Lamaila to such an extent that this surrounds his entire body and and all his doings and everything are surrounded with this chut shel lavan. And this is what Rashi here is reminding us. Obviously, it's a Rashi that's describing the type of behemoth which Yankov wanted to hold for himself. We're talking about Vrudim, but really there's a Yena Shel Torah here. There's something much deeper here. We're talking about a chut shel lavan, which means the etzem nefesh that is in existence within every yid and surrounds him. It's makif es gufay soviv. Towards the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also referred that now we're going from Pashas Vayetze, we are entering to Pashas Vayishlach. And Pashas Vayishlach Yankov Malachim, comes a continuation to the end of Vayetze. The end Vayetze ended, as we just discussed, with the Malachim, that the Rebishter Vayivgu boy Malachei Elakim, that the Rebishter sent Malachim to greet Yaakov. Then we come to Pashas Vayishlach, start reading Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim. Yaakov sent Malachim. Sent Malachim. Whom did he send them to? Esav. Rebbe says that it's brought in Svarim that Yaakov here lived through a Gullus. Yaakov was about to enter Eretz Yisrael. Yaakov here was such a standard that he was ready for the Geula Shleima. He was ready for the coming of Mashiach. Memela, that is why Yankov sent Malachim to Esav, because it's already the time to notify Esav, because we know that the main goal is now, we are now in the hands of Esav. Esav and Edom, this is the same minion. So Memela, Yaakov here was already in the position of preparing Edom and Esav for the final steps of the Geula. This is what Yaakov was ready for already. So this is the Sedra that we are going into now, is a Sedra which reminds us the level which Yaakov was at that time, that he was already ready to end with the entire concept of Gullus. Yaakov finished his own Gullus, his personal Gullus. He left all the areas of Gullus. He was ready to go into Eretz Yisrael, and he was ready to send Malachim to Esav, that Esav should get ready, that it's already coming the times of Mashiach. However, it was not the time for it yet. And we also now, we are beginning to read Vayishlach today by Menachem. However, the final reading of Pashas Vayishlach will be read on this coming Shabbos. And this following Shabbos is already the day of Erev Yutes Kislev. And it's already also an Inyan of Geula. Also has a shaykhus to Geula, and the famous description how the whole idea of Chasidus has changed from before Peterburg to after Peterburg, meaning before the Alter Rebbe was imprisoned to afterwards. And there's a saying from the Rebbe Rashab. Rebbe Rashab said it is hard to say so, but the Inyan is azay. This is how the Inyan is, that ma hazayis hazeh, just like an olive, kishekoitchen, say when the olive is crushed, humoisi eshamnei, that is when the olive gives out its oil. The same he said b'negei Alter Rebbe. After the Alter Rebbe went through the spiritual Inyan of Golus, the Inyan of, not only the whole Inyan of Golus of being the Ketisha, being crushed spiritually. The fact that the Alter Rebbe went through being imprisoned for the time he was in prison. This brought to a stronger revealing of the Shemen Zayis. As we know, Pnimis Hasidus is compared to Shemen Zayis. So when the Hasidus really began flowing much stronger, it all came about after the Alter Rebbe was released from Peterborough. I will also mention that today is an extreme appropriate time also to remind about the Miftzayim in general. And preparing ourselves for the Chag HaChagim, the Yontiv of all Yontivs, the day of Yutas Kislev. And Miftzayim, when we're talking about Miftzayim, it's extremely appropriate to mention now Miftzah Chanukah. Because from right now we're going into the Yontiv of Chanukah, and all the Miftzayim regarding Chanukah should be done and prepared properly. And together with this reminded us about all the Miftzayim. And first and foremost, the union of Miftzah Sefer Torah, which is something which has to do with Achdus of Klal Yisrael, uniting Klal Yisrael to see to it that each and every Yid should have an ois in the Sefer Torah. The Sefer Torah HaKlolim, which are currently being written. And together with this, the Rebbe reminded us also about all the Miftzayim as well, and counted each one of them, that it's an appropriate time for everyone to be involved in each and every one of the Miftzayim, to reach out to every Yid with them. Good Tavach.